Punk music rebelled against the establishment. You could hear it in the sound and see it in the defiant look. While young bands of 80s new wave admired punk style, they weren't as interested in the politics.
Oh, you were a punk band?
No way, we're not punk, we're new wave.
I didn't know there was a difference.
Come on, there's a whole different attitude to the music, man. Punkers are into an angry thing. New wave, hey, we're just having fun with it.
In the early 80s, new wave was introduced as a marketing term to distance new bands from 70s punk, which seemed too rough and confrontational for American audiences.
I say whip it! Whip it good!
Eventually, new wave developed its own identity, and the term was used to distinguish both bands who came out of the punk scene and bands who borrowed elements of punk and made it more accessible.
We just knew that punk rock was going to change the world. You could imagine how disgruntled we all were when new wave came along. The Knack, that was the first one I remember. The Knack. God, all my punk friends were up in arms.
I think the Knack was cool, but it was, it was definitely not God Save the Queen.
New wave means it's cash. New wave means it's pussyfooting, wants to go halfway there, but hasn't got the guts to go the whole way. New wave just made us vomit on the floor.
Unlike punk, new wave mirrored the affluent 80s, producing music that was flashy, apolitical, and escapist.
I think the new wave bands probably reached a bigger audience than the punk bands because the message in their music was a lot more pop-oriented. A lot of the punk music was, a lot more political.
Sucker, boys like me.
Life has got a few more things to offer than just pure aggression against the status quo. When you really love music, you find a lot of other emotions or modes that you want to express yourself in. So punk becomes a little bit limiting.
Things changed not because people wanted, say, something not as edgy, but the new wave thing evolved. It was more melodic in a different sense, but it was still edgy.
That was a good time. Yeah. I got pretty good.
I think it comes down to the old questions of accessibility and melody. New wave was very, very song driven, and a lot of the music was really based around these really great hooks.
We never made any claim that we didn't love pop music. Our music right from the beginning was always a blend of pop and punk. And we weren't the only ones doing that.
What I was trying to do was I was trying to take all the anger, all that kind of the hurly-burly nature of punk rock, the kind of, ramble-tamble, the kind of cacophony of noise, and to expand the horizons of the music. I used the springboard of the change between punk rock and the 80s music to do that.
Basically, if you couldn't cut it in punk, you had a good chance of cutting it in new wave. Adam Ant is a perfect example. Adam Ant started off as a punk. He was a terrible punk rocker. Then he moved on to new wave. And he did the same thing, the prancing, the mincing, the jumping around to high-pitched yelps, and it was excellent.
As post-punk bands experimented with musical identities, one band invented a bold signature sound.
When I first heard The Police, I thought this is a band that's going to be around for a while. They just jumped out of the radio.
In London in the mid-70s, Stuart Copeland, Andy Summers, and Sting formed The Police and started performing in local punk clubs.
The whole scene was very vibrant, but the music kind of left me a little cold. But I just said, this is the way to go. So I thought I can play with that kind of energy, and we'll just hide our ability. We weren't the greatest punk group, and I think the press figured out fairly early that we were imposters.
We knew too much. Not that you shouldn't know much, but I think it's when you know a certain amount, it's hard to keep yourself in this narrow straitjacket. But I think then the Police became more new wave, less punk.
By combining musical styles like reggae and jazz with Sting's strong melodies, the Police invented a complex brand of pop.
A lot of people refer to them as the Beatles of the 80s, you know, and I think it's a great point.
With 1983's Synchronicity, the Police had the #1 album and song in America. By now the biggest act in the world, the Police set out on a stadium tour that left musical categories behind.
They were considered a punk or new wave band at the beginning, and they incorporated reggae into their music, and the way that whole thing evolved was pretty incredible to see it.
At the height of the Police's success, the band split, with Sting moving on to pursue a solo career.
Well, Sting likes to say that it was Shea Stadium, which is where he realized that this is the pinnacle and there's no higher that we can go. We played our best show that night. It all came together that night. I don't think it's possible to achieve more of a nirvana.
Now, there's something rather thrilling about jumping off right at the high point of the curve. And as I look back on it now, I think it was a very, courageous and move, which put a great deal of energy into the myth of the band, or the legend of the band.
The post-punk category of new wave freed up bands to try different styles and become better musicians. And as the Police showed, new rules meant that innovative groups could break out of small clubs and move to center stage. Coming up, new wave fashion makes a statement.
I like to stick out of a crowd because my mom doesn't like it.